Good morning. We are live on Coast to Coast Football on YouTube, but we're going to bring in our Facebook communities. We are going to bring in Atlanta Falcons fans on All Falcons just because we're going to be talking some Falcons today and Scott Kennedy Sports, which many of you have found over the last year or so. So we'll bring those in and we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. This is Coast to Coast Football. I am Scott Kennedy, one of your hosts. I am in Atlanta. This guy over here is Nick Kendall. He's my co-host, and he is in Seattle. So we are coast to coast with your football coverage. Appreciate everybody coming in today. Nick, how are you doing this morning, bright and early in Seattle?
I'm cold, man. I'm missing Hawaii. Been back for a week already, but I'm freezing my butt off up here in the Pacific Northwest. We have it pretty cold in our house when we go to sleep because both pets sleep with us, and we sleep in the upstairs floor, so it gets hot up there, especially with them like crowding you out. So I come in here, I try to blast the heat before I come on here, and then turn it off because I know it's super loud. So it's probably
a little
about
space heater and shut the door.
Yeah.
That's what I do for my whole basement. I've got a space heater. I close my door in the office. I crank it up, then I don't have to heat the whole.
I might have to do that, although you probably would hear it. That's the that's the issue.
But it does work a little faster, probably.
That's very true.
Yeah, I think everybody else we're the exception down here in the Southeast. It's supposed to be close to 80 today, and like 2/3 of the country's in a blizzard watch. So we sucked all of your heat down to the South, just like we suck college football championships down here to the South. So
here we go.
It's one of those things. Want to say good morning to some folks as the algorithms are finding their way out into the football world, and people start coming in. As you start coming in, I want to remind people who watch this from the beginning on demand, because most of our views actually are on demand. Leave a comment for me. I'll forward it to Nick if you have anything that you see that you want us to clarify, or that was a good point, or Scott, you're out of your mind. Yes, please. I enjoy the interaction. That's one of the reasons we do this. Michael Ranquillo is always in here from Tucson, Arizona, and he interacts with us all the time. We love him for it. Michael says, good morning, Scott and Nick on Coast to Coast Football. Michael, good morning to you. And Dave with the blue and orange hearts coming in, a Denver Broncos fan with a let's ride license plate. That's very personalized. Dave, I don't remember seeing that one. I don't know if you've just recently changed that one. And Joe Cannon, one of our resident Falcons fans, coming in. He says, good morning, Scott and Nick. Over on Facebook. One of the things we want to get into today, and we'll kind of let the chat dictate a little bit what y'all want to talk about if you guys have any questions. But I have a feeling you'll probably ask us questions about what we're going to be talking about because it's an interesting topic. It's Wednesday. We're going to go through the NFL.com Daniel Jeremiah's second mock draft. Yep. I like to say there was a shock in the top 5. Shocking, so to speak. How shocked can you be by mock drafts? I don't know. But Daniel Jeremiah, Nick, isn't a guy who just throws stuff out there for shock value. Yeah. If he makes a move or he does something, there's some good reason behind it. Not like some of the other guys we see who really just kind of throw stuff on the wall hoping to get some attention, so to speak. Daniel Jeremiah is not one of those guys. He does his homework.
Yeah, he does his own homework. Obviously, he has people in the league, and he always says on his Move the Stick podcast or NFL.com, NFL Network bits that his top 50s are how he sees it. His mock drafts are how he's projecting it to happen. Of course. So 2 different things there. I always think it's important to add that caveat. So this is obviously still sprinkled in what he sees, what his influence is in this kind of thing, but also it's what he's hearing, team fits and whatnot. So it's not always the exact players fitting spots, but also the positions that you're seeing go at different spots as well. So we can get into that. But yeah, your big shock. I don't want to steal it from you, but Will Anderson falling a little bit in the draft. Alabama edge rusher, been a consensus top 3 pick for this upcoming cycle since halfway through the 2021 season, I would say even. And falling to number 5 overall with interesting athletic profile, size, length monster, Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech going before Will Anderson at the edge rusher spot. So that's the first time I've seen that. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the last, we're not even, I guess a year ago right now, I was starting to mock, or maybe a little bit before a year ago, but I was starting to mock, what's his name? Trevon Walker to the Broncos at pick 9 pretty consistently, being like, this guy is pretty darn talented. We'll see where he goes, but I'm going to take him at 9. And then the combine happened and he shot up to, number 1, number 2, number 3.
Yeah, those pro days and stuff. So we've got a lot of information to still go around, and we'll talk about some of those guys in the top 10 that could be combine guys. Joe, you might want to pay attention on this one for sure. Falcons fan, it's sitting there at number 8 is talking about one of those guys. And yeah, seeing Will Anderson at 5 isn't necessarily a big shock. That's not the big surprise. The big surprise is that more than one defensive player would go ahead of him. That's the big surprise right now, because it's certainly possible that 3 quarterbacks go in the top 5 and go ahead of Will Anderson, which would be then leave Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. So what is the surprise there is that Tyree Wilson goes ahead of him. How likely is you to see that? Because we've seen some pretty wide variance on Tyree Wilson. Is this a boom or bust kind of guy, or is what's the story with him? Because I've seen him down in the teens, pretty low, and all of a sudden, here he is, number 3 overall. Is that a monument, or does that help describe kind of how we feel about this draft? We talk about it a lot being buts on this draft. Every player is, I like him, but I love Will Anderson, but he's 230 pounds.
Yeah, for Will Anderson, it's the size, right? That's definitely a part of it. Also, he is very raw still in his pass rushing ability, or not his pass rushing ability, but his pass rushing technique. He's been winning on speed and bend, where he doesn't have much going on in terms of the hand technique, the counters, which when you are Myles Garrett level freaky, that's okay. You can get away with that, but he's not a Myles Garrett level package. I mean, if you supersize him by 40 pounds, then you have, and with the same athleticism, then you have Myles Garrett. So he's not Myles Garrett level, able just to run around guys, run through guys. So I could see that. And the other thing is, we talked about it earlier. I'm going to bring in our chat from earlier here, Scott. Your Wild Critters?
The Wild Krats is,
Wild Krats?
I said, you haven't seen we were talking some diving, and I was saying the octopus is like my favorite animal. Their natural ability to mimic and squeeze through holes and everything and blend in is just incredible. The Army would pay zillions of dollars, the military would, to be able to do what they can do. There's a show called The Wild Krats. I'm like, you know, kids, you probably haven't seen them, where they take those creature powers and turn them into superheroes in a cartoon. So it's kind of fun, the creature powers. And yeah, the octopus is pretty darn cool.
Well, Tyree Wilson's creature power is, I guess, the spider monkey or something with an incredible arm length, because there's nobody who has the length at the edge that he has. And he can be, I don't think he's the same level of explosiveness that you see from Travon Walker, but he might have a little bit more power in his game than Travon Walker had coming out. So he's a run defense unto himself coming out, and still scratching the surface from a long distance away, given his reach, scratching the surface of his ability as well. So I could see somebody going after him again because of that creature power that he has, which is the length. And length matters up front. Teams all want it, especially in today's NFL. If you were going to be playing lighter boxes, you need to be able to cover more. They're looking for it for a linebacker, looking for it for defensive line.
And Joey Nichols says, Will probably going to come into the combine at 245 plus. Yeah, I think one of the best comps I've used for him is like his ceiling. What would you think of who he could be? It's probably like a Von Miller, and Von played at 6'3", 250 pounds. Nick's freezing up on me just a little bit. The audio's been okay, but Nick, you're freezing on me. So let me bounce you out of here just for a moment and see if he needs to restart and come back. Now that's a lot of me. I know, I apologize in advance. But I agree with you, Joey. But again, he's not, that'll help if he comes in at 235. Using a couple of guys back using the Wayback Machine. AJ Green and Julio Jones were compared against one another since they were sophomores in high school. One's from South Carolina, one's from Alabama. They're both, and I don't use this lightly, generational type of talents, and they were. The question about Julio was, what's his top end speed really going to be like? Because he's got the big body, he's got the body control, he's got the hands. And then the question on AJ Green was, is he big enough? Is he a little frail? Is he a little too thin? And then the combine rolls around after these guys have had all kinds of time to prepare. Julio comes in and runs like a 4.3 something, and AJ comes in and weighs at like 220 something. I'm like, okay, well, those questions have been answered. So yes, Will Anderson, it's a lot easier to put on weight than it is to. Nick, you might want to, if you get it back in, just give me a thumbs up, since you can't add yourself. Looking better, because if you're still in that little thumbnail, I can't tell. I was like, is he still frozen? But But yeah, he's got a chance to put on 15 pounds of weight when he's out of season and all he's doing is combine prep. Won't be that difficult. I agree with you, Joey. So, but again, it's still a little bit of the, yeah, but there were some questions coming out about Vaughn. Was he a little undersized? Bryce Young, oh, I love him, all the intangibles, but he's a little undersized. Will Levis, yeah, look at the arm, the size, the strength. He's got everything, but the production wasn't there. The decision making, some of the accuracy. All of those guys are kind of like that for me, except maybe Jalen Carter, who Daniel Jeremiah has going number 1 overall. And the but on him is, yeah, but he's a defensive tackle. Is that worthy of a number 1 overall pick?
And his butt, I think, still is somewhat of the technique. Honestly, like he is actually winning with just pure freakish ability right now. And he's actually, I think, talented enough in the strength, movement, body type categories that he probably never has to be an actually super technical player and still be really good. Now, come the twilight of his career, the back half, you better have that technical ability as your ability or your physical prowess starts to slide a bit. But I think he's actually one that it's the, just like we talked about the Myles Garrett conversation prior, the tools that he has are so natural that he doesn't have to be the most technically refined player and still be unbelievably dynamic.
Yeah, he'll learn his craft through the years. I mean, he's young.
Yeah.
Obviously. I mean, but not all these guys are young. Some of them come in at 25 years old, but he's still young. And he'll have plenty of opportunity to learn his craft as he develops. We talk about it all the time. He hasn't had to. And sometimes it's like, well, the butt on him is like, well, he admitted to being a little gassed against Ohio State. Okay, well, that happens. He's 300 and something pounds, and he hasn't really been challenged. You know what he did? He challenged himself. I love that. He challenged himself to get into better shape because he hadn't needed to. He hasn't needed all of the technical refinement beforehand, but I believe in his work ethic. So Joey comes in, he says, Jalen Carter is number 1 on my board. Me too. He really is. As far as if we're stacking up Madden numbers and this guy's a 98, this guy's a 97, 95, 95, 94, the number 1 talent, the highest rating on my board is Jalen Carter. I think he is the go ahead.
Maybe Bijan would be higher if you're just putting in
numbers. Okay, I can live with that. Bijan Robinson, running back. I can live with that.
He plays running back. Yeah.
I can live with that. And
sorry to cut you off. I just
Ryan's coming in and just saying that. And I just got done saying this. What makes you think Carter will be in better shape in the NFL when he was out of shape for the playoffs? He wasn't out of shape. And one, he wasn't out of shape. He admitted to getting a little gassed by the high tempo offense from Ohio State. Because it's something he hadn't really had to face at that point. How did he respond? He went and put in extra work, made sure that wasn't going to happen again. We just got done talking about this, Ryann, as you were typing this up, probably. Just he didn't necessarily get challenged, and he didn't have to know all of the nuances of playing the defensive tackle position, all the techniques, the hand placement, the different moves. He will learn that. Because when he found himself being gassed when he was playing against Ohio State's high-tempo offenses, they were running more plays than anybody had before them. He says, "I'm getting tired." That happens for guys that are 330 pounds. Yeah. You target those guys. You try and wear them out side to side, lateral movement. It's a strategy. What did he do? He stayed after and he worked harder for the month between the games or the 2-3 weeks between the games. I like that in a guy. So. I do. I like that in a guy. Also, Anthony coming in. Anthony Manzano, MOB, says, hi, Scott. Hello to you too. And hello, Nick, as well. I'm sure he didn't mean to leave you out. He has a question here. It says, when you look at Jalen Carter, do you see more of a traditional 0 technique or is he a 3 technique? Nick, go ahead. I want you to get this one.
He's a 3 technique, but he could play across the line. I think if you're running a 3-4 defense, you line him up at 4-eye and gap and a half him or 2 gap him. That's fine. You want to move him to 3 technique. I think that's probably the spot you're going to see him most of the time. So that way you can get him in one-on-ones. I think it would be a waste to have him be a gap space occupier to free up somebody else. No, you're trying to free up Jalen Carter. Mm-hmm. And then in those sub packages where you can be really aggressive and exotic with your pass rush looks, you can line him up over the center as a shade nose, 1 technique from time to time as well. But for me, 3 technique to 4-eye, kind of getting him as that opposite of a true nose tackle that can actually do the dirty work to free him up. That's where I'd put Jalen Carter. Kind of the guy he reminds me of. I remember the first game where I really paid attention to Jalen Carter, and I was like, "Holy bleep, this is unbelievable." Was Kentucky 2021. I think he had 3 sacks in that game and just was constantly in the backfield. He moves to me with the length and the fluidity to get off guys and just the easy, like water through some of these blockers, is Chris Jones, who, he can play some nose tackle, but is not. I mean, they always have somebody in there in Kansas City who does more of the dirty work to free up Chris Jones. They even use Chris Jones as an edge rusher in some packages. And I think Carter has the athleticism. It's not the bend type, but that power cruncher kind of end where in some looks you can do that. So that's how I see Jalen Carter. I see very similar to Chris Jones in my book.
And I'm going to go back a little farther because Anthony, no, I don't think he would be a 0. I think he can because he's big and strong enough. That's not necessarily when you use him. And I think you can use him as a defensive tackle in a 4-3. That's probably his best position. He's athletic enough that he could move out to end in a 4-3. He's the absolute sky high if he reaches every single ounce of his potential, pie in the sky, Reggie White. Reggie White was a 300-pound defensive end and one of the best defensive players that this game has ever seen. So he's got that type of athletic potential. Now, what it takes to have that athletic potential and turn into Reggie White, you don't know until it happens. But athletically speaking, he's got the size, the athleticism to be that number 1 overall. And would the Bears think about sitting there at number 1 and taking him? If I told you were going to get Reggie White, absolutely, you'd still sit there, unless maybe you could trade back to 3 because 2 guys wanted quarterbacks, and you take that risk. But if the Bears, and that's what Daniel Jeremiah, since we're talking about this, he did no trades. So with the Bears sitting at number 1, he had them taking Jalen Carter, and frankly, I agree.
Yeah, not at number 1, but the player that makes the most sense. Also, Scott, I know you say it doesn't matter at the top, but teams just hack down their board so much that I think you still have to talk about it in the conversation. But Matt Eberflus's defense has always been greatly reliant on a 3 technique, dominant 3 technique. I mean, to the point where the Colts a couple years ago traded for DeForest Buckner because they felt like they moved a first-round pick and then paid a big contract for DeForest Buckner out there to get him in the defense to really rush after the quarterback. It's one reason I'm curious if the Bears would target a Draymond Jones in this free agency because they need a 3 technique, a 1-gap penetrator on that smaller side. But yeah, he's a great player, number 1 player. He's going to be the number 1 player on my board, even though typically just given the position they play, their alignment, edge rushers have a better chance at value because their situation gives them more opportunity to rush the passer, right, which is more valuable. But I think that's kind of how freaky and special Jalen Carter is as a player.
And out in space, it's harder to target those guys. It's harder to double team those guys. If I'm going to run a back over there or a tight end, but then I'll just switch sides on them. Okay, well, I put him in motion. There's more space, so there is more opportunity where. But if I can get a guy that can take on a double team and still get through, come on. I mean, that's pretty special. That's pretty special in there. So Daniel Jeremiah, I put the link in the chat. I always try and do that. I know he's gotten more views than I'll ever send him, but if we're going to talk about him, we're gonna link his mock draft. And what's interesting, he did his first mock draft in January. I think January 20th. So it's been a good month since he did his first one. With no trades, he stuck to his guns, and the number 1 overall pick for the Chicago Bears was Jalen Carter. Number 2, moving down, and this one was Houston Texans, was Bryce Young. There's some questions over which quarterback goes number 1 overall or the first quarterback off the board. Would somebody get crazy and take Will Levis? I think CJ Stroud is in the conversation. Here's the thing, though, Nick. I don't think there's any real doubt that Bryce Young will be 1 or 2. Like, he's not going to 3 or 4. It's like, okay, someone may take someone else, but then Bryce Young will be there. So let's say the Colts trade up and they take CJ Stroud. Texans are getting Bryce Young. He's going to be, if he's not the first, he's the second, whereas there's some debate about who could be the other guy in there with Bryce Young between Stroud, Levis, and possibly Richardson after the next 2 months.
I think it's possible all 4 of those quarterbacks are taken in the top 10. I think it's more than a 50-50 proposition now, given especially the drop-off at quarterback this season. After those 4, you have Hendon Hooker, who might not play this year at the ACL, and then Jake Hayner. I mean, it falls off an absolute cliff this season. Kind of a little bit opposite of last year. We had a bunch of day 2 talent. This year, it's the top quarterbacks, and then good luck. So I could see teams tripping over themselves to try to get those guys. I do think there's a reality out there. I'll give it like a 3 out of 100 chance where Bryce Young is the third quarterback off the board, where teams are absolutely in love with Will Levis's personality. Apparently, he just has like people love the dude, and they kind of talk away last season's performance. I think he had a hamstring injury. Obviously, had the hand injury. Rich Scangarello was really poor for them. They didn't have any. The offensive line was terrible. The wide receivers were terrible. I could see that as well. Morning to Chris Walker. Good to see you. I'm going to have Bryce Young number 1 on my board, though. I'm just saying that I do think that there is a reality out there where he is third because he is such an outlier. I think dating back to year 19, we'll go 3 quarters.
Oh, you got frozen in a really unfortunate spot. It looks like you're
for a sec.
It doesn't look good. You've said it before, though, going back 30, 40 years, that there was only 3 quarterbacks that were under 195 pounds, I think
it was. Yep.
Yeah, and and none of those guys were first rounders. So he is an outlier. I do think the game has changed a little bit, where they're protecting the quarterbacks. That said, let me see. Here it was, Anthony comes in, he says something about the issue that Tua has been having since he got into the league. I don't think teams are going to be a little bit more hesitant to take him, and the brain injuries aren't necessarily size. The head injuries aren't necessarily about size. So I don't worry too much about that one. If he was breaking ribs or doing shoulders or something, but Bryce Young hasn't really battled any injuries. Andrew Luck was going through all these big quarterbacks. Ask any quarterback from the 80s or before, they've all had, Steve Young, Andrew Luck left because of concussion questions. It's the head injuries aren't size related for me. Those are usually when your head's hitting the ground, not necessarily helmet to helmet type of blows. So being 6'6" doesn't really help on those. So I don't think that's as big a deal. Let me see here. Let me go back down. This is a name I don't necessarily recognize, but I want to hit up a Joe here real quick before we move on. It says, how do you feel about Kalaya Cansey? I don't have any feelings one way or the other than I hope I said his name right.
Kalijah with the J, the hard J on there.
Okay. The Portuguese J.
Yeah, exactly. He is extremely undersized, but one of the best interior pass rushers in this class. I think he's topping out about 6 foot 6'1", 280 from Pitt, and he can get after it. I know that in Mel Kiper's first mock draft, he had Kalija Cansey going 10 overall, which was a shock for a lot of people. Really good 3 technique, but kind of a shock given just how small he actually is. I think if you're looking for a 3 technique, he's going to be a good one, but he is an outlier in terms of his size. He would have to test like an absolute freak for me to consider him in the first round, given the lack of size that he has. But some teams are going to like that 3 technique interior penetrator. Teams running the Vic Fangio defense where you're trying to play less bodies in the box probably won't like him as much because he's going to get eaten up in double teams in first and second down. So really unique player, fun player, going to be interesting to see where he goes. To me, early second round, you're taking a very specific niche player, but one who could be elite at that specific role. So that's how I feel about Kalija Cansey. Just 6 foot 280. I mean, it's just such a weird body type, but the tape is fun. He gets after it out there.
That's a big middle linebacker. That's a jumbo inside linebacker. No, I'm kidding. Roderick has a question. I'd make sure we get back to this one about Ryan Nielsen and the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator. Let's hit on this one at 8 when we get down there. Roderick, I'm going to make sure I don't want to miss you. And Joey says something that we've been saying for a while. The NIL really hurt not just the mid-level quarterback talent, but really the talent overall in this draft. But I would agree with you. Quarterback is probably the most affected because I can go to a big Power 5 school and get my NIL money, which is better than 3rd round money or 4th round money. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. It is good for college football. It's not great for this draft class. We've been saying that for the last couple of months, Joey. Agree with you 100%. Also, look at John Clay eventing coming in here. He says, good morning, gents. See you guys at 67 and 68. Okay, it took me a second to get that one. John Clay breaking the ice with a super chat. And just a reminder, wherever you're watching, YouTube or Facebook. The best way to help our show and support the show is with super chats or Facebook stars. So we appreciate John Clay Eventing coming in with the super this morning. Broncos fans saying, see you guys at 67 and 68. Yeah, that's one of the big changes from Daniel Jeremiah's first mock draft is the Denver Broncos were in the first round. Now they are not. But I gave a pretty passionate speech on, I think a first round pick is worth having the right coach. Did you get the right coach? I think you did. But we will see for sure. So Houston Texans, Bryce Young makes sense to me. Speaking of guys who are well-liked and respected in the locker room and, love the dude, Bryce Young's all that in a bag of chips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, fun playmaker at the quarterback position, twitchy athlete. No matter, he's one of those players that is going to be so bleeping frustrating to play against because you will feel like you have him on the ropes, and then he'll just flip his shoulders, flip his hips, and deliver a feathery football to a wide open player 15 yards the opposite side of the field. I know that some of the comparisons right now, we're in that crazy season where like, oh, who's Bryce Young's athlete comparison? Why, it's Steph Curry. I was like, what? No, he's not Patrick Mahomes. Also, he doesn't have that type of arm talent. And also the frame. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, he's twitchy and incredible and can do all the off-platform stuff, but he's also like decently thick. He can actually glance off a guy where I would say Young is much more slippery than he is sturdy. Again, talking about the size and the profile, but very unique player. I have a really hard time thinking of a comp for him in the league, but you see him play quarterback. He plays it like a really smooth second baseman out there flipping a double play. So good player, going to be an outlier. But I think he has enough arm talent. It's not elite. I think we disagree a little bit, Scott, on terms of the level of arm that Bryce Young has. But it's definitely good enough for pretty much 90% of the throws, 95% of throws you're going to see at the NFL level. Can be a playmaker, which you have to have, play beyond the X's and O's in today's NFL. And you mentioned it. It comes down to the dude. What's in between the ears? What's in the chest cavity? I think Bryce Young, apparently, don't know the kid, but apparently has both of those things. So would not shock anybody to fall in love with him.
I think our disagreement may have come when we were talking about the comparison of the ability to make plays in a variety of situations was to Patrick Mahomes. I think Patrick Mahomes has as good, if not the best ability to deliver a ball anyhow, anyway. I just never think of Patrick Mahomes as having the absolute fastball, huge arm. He doesn't need it. He's got more than enough arm. He's got a good arm. And that was where that debate came into. And it doesn't matter because I think Patrick Mahomes, and this isn't going out on a limb here, he's the best player in football. He doesn't have to have John Elway or Brett Favre fastball to be the best quarterback. My all-time favorite quarterback is Joe Montana. No one ever talked about him as having a great arm.
And I was talking about Bryce Young's arm talent when I was referring to I know we have a little bit of a difference.
But that's how it started.
Yeah.
But that's how it started because I think Bryce Young has plenty of arm. I don't think he's got a huge arm. I don't think he's got the strongest arm in this draft. I think he's got enough arm, and his ability to make plays off script and to improvise is what led us to the Patrick Mahomes discussion. It wasn't necessarily about Bryce Young because I agree with you on Bryce Young. I think he's got plenty of arm. What makes it so hard to scout quarterbacks is it relies the most on stuff you can't measure. Every other position, for the most part, is a bigger, faster, stronger position. Quarterback isn't necessarily that way. There's so many different ways to get the job done that you're really trying to scout intangibles, and when you can't measure those, it becomes a little riskier, so to speak.
And just adding to that real quick, a guy like it's not always the arm talent. I think that if you stacked quarterbacks in the league right now with the best dynamic, like raw arm talent, Josh Allen would probably be number one as far as the velocity. Justin Herbert's probably not far behind there. Might be forgetting somebody. You could say Stafford, but I think it's waned a bit over time. But I think you talk about Bryce Young's arm talent. I think it's better than Tua Tagovailoa. It's better than, talking about a Miami fan here, and Anthony Manzano coming in here. It's better than Mac Jones coming out. I think it's probably a little slightly better than Joe Burrow as well, in terms of absolute velocity, but those guys can get it done and still play great football. So
it's an easy comparison to say Joe Cool, the original Joe Cool for, at least Gen Xers was Joe Montana. Now it's Joe Burrow, and they are very similar quarterbacks. Neither one of them are getting neither one of them were all about arm talent. It was about reads and accuracy. Accuracy is so important. That was, that's always the key. And that's probably one of the knocks on Will Levis is his accuracy. And Anthony comes back and he says, I'm not sure if you agree with this. For Will Levis, he's a less developed version of Ben Roethlisberger or Peyton Manning. Those are very, very different quarterbacks. Ben is a stereotype big arm pocket passer who was hard to sack because he got rid of the ball and stood there. No one ever talked about Peyton Manning. We were talking about arm strength. No one ever said Peyton Manning had the world's best arm either. There's so many different ways to do this. So when I say I don't put Patrick Mahomes in that upper echelon of arm strength guys, so what? That's not a knock on Patrick Mahomes. We're talking some of the best guys, and not even some of them, the best quarterbacks in history. Which one of them would you say had just the absolute rocket of an arm? Joe Montana? No. Tom Brady? No. Peyton Manning? No.
John Elway?
Elway did. Elway did. Elway was arguably the most physically gifted quarterback in the history of this game. Especially at the time, because he could run too. Was the thing about Elway is you never really, and then Steve Young turns around and he's a more side to side, not quite as good of arm strength, left-handed version of Elway. It happens. Otherwise I might throw in Michael Vick as far as most physically gifted if he was 6'4", with that flick of the wrist arm strength he got. Anyway, we're getting off track here. We're getting off track here. Moving down to number 3 is where, with the Arizona Cardinals, is where it kind of, you hit the first real eye opener from Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft, and it's Tyree Wilson going at number 3 instead of Will Anderson. And he backs it up very well, obviously. First Ezra off the board over Will Anderson. There's question mark, exclamation point. There's a lot of love for Wilson around the league. His combination of side length and production has teams very intrigued. Obviously, it's a bigger, faster, stronger game. And Tyree Wilson's a hell of an athlete.
Yeah, a unique player, super skill, talent. And Joey comes in another one. Favre also had an incredible arm. You're correct. Those are the two guys, dating back to the
I said Elway and Favre, or how I kind of measured everybody else through the years.
And also how I'll put this in a box. We're getting way too far off track. Number 3, Tyree Wilson. We already talked about it. Incredible size. The question is, I need to see if he tests as well as some people are talking about, because the tape, he's always a late reactor, in my opinion. Watching him explode off the snap is not always the case. Just I want to see a little bit more twitch on the outside. I know he's a big pass rusher still, but in strength wins. But you need strength and twitch and explosiveness if I'm taking you top 3. So it's not like we're talking about George Karlaftis versus Nick Bonito in terms of strength versus burst. You got to have a little bit of both up top there. So Tyree Wilson, I'd be shocked if he was the first edge rusher taken, but if he is, it's because of just being such a unique power player with length that is pretty unprecedented in the league, and potentially some versatility as well. I know he's tall, so I'd be curious to see what he could look like reducing inside as a pass rusher on some snaps, especially in sub packages where, you win on first and second down with him on the edge, setting it like, taking care of 2 gaps out there. You don't even have to play as much like defensive back help on that side guarding the gaps, because he's probably that good. You can be a little bit weaker there with the support, but what is his versatility like there? It'll be an interesting look for him. I still can't wrap my mind around him going before Will Anderson, given especially just teams were throwing everything they could at Will Anderson to stop him, and he still was one of the better pressure players in the entire NCAA landscape this last season.
Relentless.
Yeah, I mean,
he's relentless.
Yeah, he's really good pass rusher, no doubt. Probably would have been number 1 overall last year. We talked about it. This year has more top talent at the very top, but then I think the middle, the gut, is not as talented.
This isn't a big move for him, for Daniel Jeremiah. Jeremiah had Tyree Wilson going 5 in his first mock draft a month ago in January. So not a huge, all he did was flip those 2. So the Seahawks got Will Anderson. Seahawks fans are thrilled. Absolutely. But we skipped over 4. 4 is the Indianapolis Colts. You know they want a quarterback, and they got C.J. Stroud. Now, one of the very first drafts I saw, mock drafts I saw, it was around Thanksgiving. The Draft Network had, at the time, the Indianapolis Colts were 14th, and they took C.J. Stroud. At the time, I said there's two things that aren't going to happen. One, the Colts aren't going to pick 14th because they're going down in a hurry, and they ended up number 4. And 2, C.J. Stroud's not going to be there at number 14. So they can still get him, but they can get him later on. And guys, enough with the Wonderlic stuff. You're killing my chat here. Nobody else can get into anything. So enough. And that happened. So they get CJ Stroud at 4. And frankly, I think he's worthy of a number 1 overall. And if I was a Colts and I knew I could get CJ Stroud by sticking at 4, I would. I would. I don't think they can get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young by sticking at 4, and they're going to have to trade up.
There'll be a quarterback for there at 4 for them.
Right, but it's not going to be one of those two, I don't think. Stroud's more likely. Young ain't making it that far.
And Will Levis could be their number 1. I mean, it's just who knows that this in the NFL people keep Levis's way.
Oh, we're losing you again, Nick. We are losing you again on that one a little bit. It looks like you're coming back. So, no, like I said at the top of the show, I think Bryce Young is the first or second quarterback off the board, but I think he's definitely top 2, and therefore Bryce Young is not going to be there at 4.
Yeah.
Stroud could be, because someone else could come in and go Levis, maybe Richardson. Someone could fall in love with Anthony Richardson and you could go that high. But if you want Young, you're going to have to move up. You're gambling on Stroud if you want to stick at 4. But I feel like if the Colts could get Stroud at 4, there's no need for me to make a trade. I just don't think they can. I don't think they can risk it.
If there's a guy that they see heading, it's going to come down to their evaluations. If there's a guy that they see as their dude, go get him. But are you confident enough in your evaluation that it's worth giving up all that extra draft capital to go get a guy? Or do you have a few guys that are close together that you like enough?
Right.
There is something to be said about going and getting your guy, but also we've seen that there's enough volatility. It is the draft. There are no sure things that if you have anybody even remotely close, maybe it's better to get, the extra couple of players on the back end on that cost controlled, especially because
more arrows in the quiver. I agree with you 100% on that. I grew up in the, Jimmy Johnson trading down era, and then Bill Belichick has made did the same thing during his run. There's just not that big a difference between players that it's good to have, until you get at the very top. And we're talking about top 5 here.
Yeah.
There might be a big difference between the players if you get it right. But I think the Colts would be thrilled to get CJ Stroud at 4. But I think they're going to end up having to trade probably a 2024 number 1 in order to move up into that spot. That might not be as bad as it seems, because the Colts aren't as far off as they looked this year. They've still got a good nucleus of talent. Coaching change should help, you would think, and then having a quarterback in there. For me, it's offensive line though that's got to improve rapidly, because their quarterback's play was bad, but it was partially connected to how with the entire system. So Shane Steichen should help. Long story short, I don't think they have a top 5 pick in 2024. If they did, you can't touch it. If I was, I'd do it like lotto protected, like the NBA does. We traded this and a lottery protected number first round pick the next year.
Yep. I'm with you. It'll be interesting. Colts also sent their 3rd round pick in 2023 to the Broncos in a trade last season. So they are already dealing with a slight lesser draft capital. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Mike Larry with the Scream photo here. Man, that's really stands out. It says, was it the Cowboys who developed this whole player rank system? Jimmy Johnson trade chart. I know that one's a little bit outdated now. I think there's a Bill Belichick one now that a lot of teams or a lot of people reference and utilize. But yeah, I think they underrated the Jimmy Johnson one. I think underrates those round 2 and round 3 picks compared to how teams are viewing them today. And Aki Dragon coming in. Colts should go after Carr and use a trade back. I think that Jim Irsay is probably out on the veteran mold. I think this is a team that's going to go after a rookie to reset it. And also just how a lot of their expensive contracts are set up. They might need that rookie quarterback contract to help refresh the roster from a salary cap perspective when you're playing non-positions of value, massive dollars, and like
like Quentin
Linebacker.
Nelson is one, when you're talking about paying a guard $20 million.
Yep.
They've got the most expensive offensive line in the NFL, at least until the Falcons get done this year.
Yeah.
They may end up with the most expensive OL in the league, and they performed bottom third. That's a bad and expensive is not a good way to win games. And I agree with you. I think the Colts have had enough of someone else's veteran quarterback. I agree. 100%. Let's go to number 5. And number 5, we already mentioned the Seattle Seahawks. Feel like they're hitting the lottery here. They get number 5 as part of the trade with the Denver Broncos. They ended up getting Will Anderson. Man, they're putting up statues of Russell Wilson for this trade in Seattle, being able to pull this off. On top of the first round pick they got last year, and then to get Will Anderson in the top 5. If that happens, something even close, a great deal became a historic deal for them, depending on how Will Anderson finishes his career.
Yeah, God, that would hurt. I kept saying the Broncos need to win some games so they can take the Seahawks out of the Will Anderson, Jalen Carter range. And here we are. I thought we did it. And at 5 overall, you have Will Anderson going at 5. Talked about him a lot. Not a perfect player. Doesn't have the absolute massive size. We'll see what he comes in and weighs at the combine. I hope he's not one of those players that comes in and weighs really well and then I'm not going to test, and then gets down to 235 at the Alabama Pro Day and then explodes with the testing numbers there. It's well, you didn't test at what you weighed at, so I'm not going to use both of these data points together. Oldest trick in the book. We'll see that with Bryce Young, I'm sure. He'll, have a ham sandwich in his pocket or something and then test at the Alabama Pro Day instead. But Aki Dragon saying George Payton was given the keys to Seattle.
The Denver Broncos general manager is maybe that's who they're putting a statue up of instead of Russell Wilson. They're putting one up of George Payton. That one hurts. That one hurts if you're a Broncos fan. But what a deal at the time, Nick. I said I thought that deal was pretty even. You're getting Russell Wilson even in a decline. It's still he was still a Pro Bowler in 2021. And the Seattle Seahawks were getting a good return on a guy that wanted away. Well, it was still a good return on a guy that wanted away, but the Broncos didn't get there. And it ended up being a really poor trade for the Broncos. I always thought it was a good trade for the Seahawks. It ended up being a really bad trade for the Broncos. And it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a win-win. Yeah. Not so far, that's for sure.
And the way they're talking about Russell Wilson makes me think that, we'll see. Patrick coming in here with the, looks like we've got a picture of Red Rocks there. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I can't tell.
Looks like it says Slayer on there. Are you an old metalhead, Patrick, like I am? So I wasn't ever a big Slayer fan, though. I was a little more refined than Slayer.
It does say Slayer, and it's a little baby with looks like screaming with the ear covers on. So probably a little bit rocking too hard there. But thank you so much, Patrick. Appreciate you coming in. I just saw your email, too. I was going to check in and see how you're doing with your meniscus. But no, I did not do the helicopter thing. My wife is an absolutely terrible flyer. She said that if you did that, you would have to make me unconscious and you could go about and I'll fly with you. I'm like, that doesn't sound worth it. Yeah, no, it's moving on here. We talked about Will Anderson. Then things get really interesting about 6. We talked about, the first 5 picks, first 6 picks, Carter, Anderson, and then quarterbacks. 6 where things kind of really start turning around here. Myles Murphy, number 6 overall. I agree with this. Myles Murphy is probably going to be my 6th player here. I personally would have Myles Murphy over Tyree Wilson, but we'll see how they test it. I think he's got a little bit more juice and explosiveness to his game, even if he is still a little bit raw. Probably for those guys, it'd come down to the mental makeup, the chutzpah, if you will. But Myles Murphy at 6, he's a guy that I'm honestly really hoping for your Falcons at 8, Scott. He's the one that's the combination of athleticism and body type that I'm hoping.
Yeah, the Falcons seem to have been 1 pick off or 2 picks off the last couple of years. Kyle Pitts is a nice player, but if they were sitting at 3, they could have gotten 3 first-round draft picks. And they're 1 spot off. Would you rather have Kyle Pitts or would you rather have the trade that the San Francisco 49ers sent the Dolphins for Trey Lance? That's an easy one. I would have rather had the 3 first-round picks for the Atlanta Falcons last year. You're talking about the elite players, and I think they stopped at 7. I don't know if Stingley ended up being that guy, but we're talking the edge rushers and Aiden Hutchinson. And frankly, we were all pretty high on Sauce Gardner as well to pair with A.J. Terrell to take care of your defensive backfield for the next 10 years. But they still ended up getting a good player in Drake London. This year, Myles Murphy could be that guy. I don't feel as strongly about him as I did the last 2 drafts. where it feels like you got quarterbacks, Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, and then question marks. Again, a lot of those, but. So if Miles Murphy's off the board, I think he's probably the most consistent. And as Daniel Jeremiah says, Aiden Hutchinson was a great pick. James Houston, undrafted free agent, had 8 sacks coming out of via Florida, via Jackson State, I believe, HBCU. And then you run in Murphy, who's a little bit different than, adds a little more size. Detroit defense starting to look pretty scary. Number 7, Las Vegas Raiders quarterback Will Levis. Will Levis says this picture will be clearer after we get through the quarterback carousel and free agency, but as of now, the Raiders need someone at the position, and Levis has incredible tools. And one thing we know is Josh Daniels would be arrogant enough to think he can take a toolsy quarterback and turn him into a superstar.
Yeah. I agree with you on that one. We'll see what happens. And Daniel Jeremiah kind of hints at it here. The quarterback carousel is going to be big for the Raiders. If they bring in Jimmy Garoppolo and give him a solid contract, that wouldn't keep me from drafting a quarterback. But Jimmy Garoppolo coming might have a prerequisite of, and you're not going to draft a quarterback here, right? Okay, I will sign the dotted line. So we'll see what happens with the Raiders. Will Levis is going to have to go somewhere. This is a team that makes some sense. If he does fall past here, I mean, if one of Levis, Stroud, or Young, I don't think Young will fall, but if one of Levis or Stroud fall to the next pick at 8 overall, might have to have a very interesting conversation with Atlanta. I think ideally, you would take Stroud, I'm sure. You love Stroud. You'd be fine taking him. But there's the take the quarterback or trade down situation that we'd have to talk about as well. But things are getting interesting seeing these quarterbacks get pushed down, not going off the board, 1, 2, 3.
I'm always really interested in trading down.
Yeah.
Again, you just heard me say a few minutes ago that more arrows in the quiver gives you more chance to hit. There's a percentage on what you're going to hit. And it was a criticism that I had when I was doing rankings at Scout, that there's a balance between quantity and quality. Where is that line? And a lot of people thought I may have leaned too hard towards quantity of a draft class. But there was, anyway, it doesn't matter. I agree. I want more picks. So trading down would absolutely work for me. Getting back to now to number 8, Roderick had a question about the defensive coordinator and Ryan Nielsen. What do we think about Ryan Nielsen, and how would he use Lucas Van Ness, redshirt sophomore out of Iowa, who may be the most intriguing prospect in this whole draft? At 6'5", 275 pounds, former hockey player. Call him high risk, high reward. How risky is he?
He's risky because he's still raw in terms of his ability, but the physical makeup of his game, the strength, length, explosiveness plays, and he has that in spades. He's a versatile player as well. One of my favorite things about watching him at Iowa is that 2021 he played some edge, but it was a lot of interior defensive line in sub packages, and because of his height, he had to really work on his leverage and his ability to work through double teams from the inside, and that worked out pretty well for him. So this year he kicks a little bit more to edge. He's got great closing burst, just the power that he plays with, the jolting. I mean, he's a dynamic player. I had questions about him still coming out of Iowa. I thought, and I think in a typical draft, you'd see him probably go more in the 13 to 20 range. But in this year, there just seems to be a little bit of missing in that area of this draft. So you're taking a value position, a guy who's going to test really well, that is versatile. And Chris Walker, do I think Van Ness makes it to the second round? Absolutely not. He's going to test really well. And there's just enough question marks about a lot of these players in this draft that if you're going to bet on traits and upside and any player, it's edge rusher for the athletic projection. And he was super effective in the snaps he had. Now, he did not play a full starter. I think he still had the second most snaps of anybody in the Iowa's defensive line, but he was not a starter. Mm-hmm. It's because he was so valuable as a pass rusher that instead of using him up on first and second down, they'd get to him in second and third down. So He's going to be a good player. I would not expect him to come in year one and play 70% of the snaps. He's probably going to have to be rotated some, and you're going to have to pick your spots to set him up. But, I mean, super versatile twist and stunt game you can use with him. Inside, outside pass rusher. He's going to be a really, really fun player in the league.
Chris Walker says, do you think Van Ness makes it to the second round? No, I don't. I don't. We're talking about a guy getting mocked into the top 10 here. I don't think there's any way he makes it to the second round. Not in this draft. Not in this draft. Holy cow, I was trying to think of the Falcons haven't had a guy like this, a defensive end, since, and I was like, wait a minute. It sounds a little like Jamal Anderson, who I put as one of the top 5 biggest draft busts of an Atlanta Falcons history with the size and speed. But Jamal never had the production. I think Lucas Van Ness had, 12 sacks, 20 tackles for loss in his 2 seasons, moving inside and outside. Sorry, I just said that, guys. And I think Lucas Van Ness will probably have some. Will probably test better. And Chuck Smith was even older than Jamal Anderson. So, and Chuck wasn't didn't have the length. He wasn't. He was like a 6'3", 260 guy, super strong, quick, tenacious. But he didn't have that pure size and length that we're talking about, where we're talking 6'5", 6'6", 270 pounds. That was Jamal Anderson, not fat, not the running back, but the other one out of Arkansas, who was just a horrific bust for the Falcons. And Roderick, I think Ryan Nielsen, he'll be versatile in his scheme, 4-3-3-4, move some guys around, get the best guys on the field. And I think free agency is going to play a big part in what we see the Falcons do on the defensive line. They're not going to just go with their number 1 pick here. They're going to bring in some bodies. They've got money for a change. Some of that money is going to the defensive line. I can guarantee that's what's going to happen. So we'll be interested to see where that goes. Number 9, Carolina Panthers, Peter Skoronski, Northwestern OL. We've talked about him a lot at number 8 to the Falcons because of his versatility to go inside, outside, and eventually move out to tackle. Would the Panthers pass on Anthony Richardson in this spot?
Really hard to say, right? Mm-hmm. It's what does Frank Reich want to do there? Right now, we have Daniel Jeremiah taking Anthony Richardson all the way down at pick 18 with the Lions. We'll see how that comes out of the NFL Combine. You just see the release, the overall physical profile of Richardson, and then after coming out of the meetings, be curious to see how the stock changes. But Skoronski, probably one of the safest prospects in this class. Mike Leary asks, who are some can't miss prospects? I think in terms of the floor, Peter Skoronski is probably a can't miss. Now, the overall value you're going to get from him will be interesting considering where he plays. But versatile guy, could in theory play 5 positions across the board. I would probably try him at right tackle first, unless you're absolutely blown away with him at center with his intelligence. Then you can get some value there. But really high floor, really technically proficient, NFL bloodlines as well. His grandpa played in the Vince Lombardi Packers as well. Skoronski as well, I think offensive tackle for Vince Lombardi. So Skoronski has been good for a number of years. We're going to be curious to see what that arm length actually measures out. If it's, sub 33 or if it's right at 33, some teams are going to take him off the board of the tackle, but I think he's good enough and a known quantity enough, especially in this draft, that you can take that. You're not swinging for the fences here, but you're almost guaranteed start. It's like, what is it? Extra innings. Now you start a guy on second base in MLB. That's essentially what Peter Skoronski is. You're guaranteed starting a guy on second base.
Yeah.
It's as much as you can for a draft.
It is. He's the Anthony Richardson might be the most intriguing prospect of this entire draft. And we just mentioned Lucas Van Ness. The offensive version of this at an even bigger position is Anthony Richardson. He does not make it into the top 10. I won't be surprised I'll be a little surprised if he makes it out of the top 10 come April. Look at Mark Schrader coming in yellow with a super chat. Mark, thank you for the support, my friend. He says, good morning, and good morning to you as well. Thank you. Helps us keep the lights on and helps keep my forehead nice and shiny. Achy Dragon says, thanks, guys. Love your shows. We love you for being here. So thank you very much. The super chat's coming in from 3 all this morning. Like I said, it helps us do what we do. So, if you like the effort, it'll make sure that we're going to be around a lot longer. That's for sure. Roderick Cook with a follow-up on Ryan Nielsen. Does he never call plays? I don't know that he's never called plays. I know he didn't last year with the Saints. Neither him or Chris Richard called plays for the Saints. As co-defensive coordinators who didn't call plays, the Saints could not block interviews for Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard the way the Denver Broncos did when Ejiro Evero was coming up. They blocked the Falcons from having an interview with him because it was a lateral move. This was considered a promotion for him. So we will see. And Charlie Beagle has a good question. Charlie Beagle with the Beagle. He says, now that guys that word D ends are called edge. I'm confused about what size you're looking for. Are edge guys like OLBs or defensive ends? They're more like outside linebackers. In a 3-man front, your edge guys are pass rushers. Sometimes they're stand-ups. We used to just call them, the guys that edge guys are pass rushers. They're not necessarily as big. If you've got the versatility of a guy who is athletic enough to play a 4-3 outside linebacker and he's 6'5", 275 pounds, he has the versatility to be a 4-3 defensive end. That's not necessarily an edge. In a 3-man front, the outside linebackers are called edges more often, but they still have to have the ability to drop back into coverage. So it's a little more confusing, but the outside linebacker in general is considered your edge position, and your 4-3 defensive end is still considered defensive end. And there is a lot of crossover there because you need those guys to be able to do both. Sound about right, Nick?
Yeah, edge really came from the draft community and trying to categorize players, and defensive end just was not cutting it, because I would say that your edge rusher in a 3-4 and 4-3 is more synonymous than your defensive ends in a 3-4 and a 4-3. Just the skill set. I think a lot of draft community will lump interior defensive line together, and then you have edge rusher, where you see teams use the language of defensive tackle and defensive end. So you have edge rushers who are more of and teams are looking for versatile skill sets. So like the Broncos, they have a lot of edge rushers, but they don't have that edge setting, big power edge type right now. You have Nick Bonito, Baron Browning, Randy Gregory, all finesse speed rushers. They don't have your George Karloftis's, your Trevon Walker type out there. So edge is just pretty much, they play the edge. I think it's that simple. A guy who projects to be an edge rusher. Not every single one is going to fit every scheme. Again, we can get way down the line.
You used to hear them called as stand-up defensive ends or walk-up outside linebackers.
Yeah.
So they're a lot of times they're in a 2-point stance, where especially in a 3-4 2-point stance is, they're standing up. In a 3-4, your defensive ends are typically 290. They're big guys that are defensive tackles in a 4-3, because in a 3-man front, you've got one guy who's 350 pounds. He's an anchor. His only job is to not get moved. And it's an SOB position. It's a position that it's tough and you don't get a lot of glory, because then the two defensive ends, the 3-4 ends, their job is basically to eat 2 blockers and let the 4 linebackers, 2 edge guys, 2 inside linebackers, get all the glory. It's so that when you're talking about edge, that's what we're talking about for sure. Ryan says, can we rate pass rushers, and are they like Micah Parsons or not? Rating pass rushers is pretty easy. We just get pressures and sacks. It's not just sacks. I think Arnold Ebiketie for the Falcons finished with just a sack and a half last year. He was better than that. He really was. He was better than just a sack and a half, and his pressure rate helped show that. The effect that he was having on the offensive backfield showed that.
Yeah.
Now let's finish here real quick with the top 10. The Philadelphia Eagles have a lot of defensive linemen hitting free agency, but there's not a lot of defensive linemen available anymore, Nick. So Daniel Jeremiah has them taking Devon Witherspoon, who could sneak into the top 10 as well. Illinois cornerback, super physical for sure.
Yeah, physical. Probably the best trash talker in this class, and he's had to fight for everything he's gotten in the league. He came in as a 0-star recruit, I believe, at Illinois, and just had an incredible year. I think he gave up, if I remember correctly, I thought I read that he gave up 0 receptions this year in press coverage, which is why, granted, it's playing Big Ten West passers, but still, that's an incredible stat. So we'll see how he tests. I think that he's not going to be every single team's favorite player, but he's going to be versatile, off coverage, press coverage, very, very tenacious coming downhill, and a tone setter at the edge, or at the cornerback spot, which you don't always see. So gonna love him. He's gonna be my cornerback too, just because I'm gonna lean into the fluidity and length of Christian Gonzalez over him. But if you wanted to say Witherspoon was your number one, wouldn't fight you one bit.
Yeah, it's close enough that I might have my preference, and I'll tell you that, but I'm not going to argue about it. They're too close. Say I don't argue levels of elite, and I don't argue levels of bad either. But when they're that close, I'm willing to concede a point and say, hey, listen, this is what I think. Not saying I'm right, especially when we're trying to predict the future.
Yeah,
Nick, that's a top 10. I want to run down through the rest. Just a couple of noteworthy things, and then I want to get your thoughts on, what really drew your attention moving behind there. Some of the things that got my attention: Jordan Addison at 12, USC wide receiver, is the first wide receiver off the board. Joey Porter is at 16 to the Commanders. We've seen him go as high as 8 to the Falcons. Anthony Richardson falling all the way to 18 at the Detroit Lions. Really split on him. The thoughts on him. I don't think he lasts until 18. Running back Bijan Robinson, we talked about, might be the best talent in the entire draft at 19 to Tampa Bay. Quentin Johnson, another big height, weight, speed receiver at 21 to the Chargers.
Please no on that one.
And then Brian Brisset falling all the way to 24. Those are some of the things that got my attention before we get out of here, Nick.
For me, a player that I absolutely love, but I can't imagine them going there just because of a recent draft pick, is Brian Branch to the Ravens. They just found a really good use for the safety they took last season, who was an incredible dime backer and slot player for them. Brian Branch is a similar player out there. So I just feel like that's an overlap of redundancy for that pick there. But Brian Branch is one of the best defensive backs in this class, maybe the best slot in this class as well, one of the best tacklers in the entire draft. So heck, I could see the Ravens just keep investing in that defense. That would make some sense. And then to see Dalton Kincaid, 25 years old. I mean, he's pretty old, all the way up at pick 15 over Michael Mayer, over Luke Musgrave, over Darnell Washington. Pretty shocking to me. And you guys are right. Yeah, Kyle Hamilton. Thank you. Sometimes the name just doesn't pop in when the coffee juice isn't flowing yet. So those are ones that I
wanted at 8 last year, and he ended up being PFF's number 1 safety.
Yeah,
Kyle
very
Hamlin
weird
from
role,
Atlanta, Georgia. That would have been a nice pick.
Yeah. And the other thing that sticks out to me, you mentioned Quentin Johnson to the Chargers. I think we've seen multiple. Daniel Jeremiah is very intimately connected to the Chargers, covers all the Chargers. Their play-by-play, maybe is their color guy for covering them, lives out in LA, very close to the Chargers. He's mocked the Chargers now, a tight end and a wide receiver in back-to-back in his mocks. That team is looking for a pass weapon to help this offense out there. They're going to be probably moving on from Keenan Allen. Don't really have any other weapons out there. I mean, you have the running back who's aging a bit. Obviously, Michael Williams is a great player, but they're looking for weapons. So those are some names that stick out here. And then one that I absolutely hate, Nolan Smith going to the Chiefs at pick 31, Rich getting richer, and a totally opposite skill set of George Karlaftis at the other edge spot. I love pairing skill sets like that. Guys who play the same position, but you guys talk about edge. They're both edge rushers. One weighs 240, one weighs 275 out there, but that one would piss me off tremendously. Why can't the Chiefs, burn away, like take a running back here or something, draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire again, but not a good pass rusher.
Yeah, I got some stick from Chiefs fans saying that we all should feel cheated. We're all cheated by the ending of the Super Bowl, and I included Chiefs fans, and the more names they called me and all of the things, all you did was prove my point that you're angry. You're angry because a flag-happy ref has called into question the legitimacy of your Super Bowl win, and you don't want that to happen.
No.
I didn't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. So yes, Chiefs fans, you were cheated too. I didn't care who won. I don't care. So anyway, on that real quick, Kenny Booker coming in, KB82, real quick, and then we'll get out of here. He says, when tight end Browers from Georgia finally enters the draft, is he a first rounder? Yes, he is. Nick, does he go in the top 10?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, probably.
It's hard to say this far out, right? Things can happen, but
not that far out anymore.
Yeah.
If he was in this draft, actually, PFF did one of those if everybody was draft eligible, and I don't remember seeing his name as high as it could have been. He may go top 10 next year, Kenny.
Well, if they PFF did one of those, it's because they added Caleb Williams and Marvin
Drake
Harrison.
May 1 and 2.
Yeah, and Drake May, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. also.
He was top 10.
Yep. So Bowers just has if you have an incredible tight end, then obviously that's super valuable, but there's a lot of just mediocre, get space filling tight ends in the league that you do okay with that. But still, if Brock Bowers was in this one, he'd be a top 10 pick. Probably we'd be talking about him probably about pick 6, maybe 6 to 8. But
probably about pick 8 with the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, God, you guys could do the 12 personnel stuff you could do with him would be incredible. Granted,
well, and
kind of burning.
And frankly, Kyle Pitts lines up in the slot and wide more than he lines up in line tight end.
Yeah, want to see him more at X in the future, but you have Drake London. Get versatile guys, playmakers, and see how it works out, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But yeah, Brock Bowers, top 5 talent going into next year's draft.
So on that note, we are going to get out of here. And we spent a lot of time in the top 10. We do spend a lot of time in the top 10. We can start breaking down some individual teams as well and some of those, but we're still early enough that there's so much questions about what is going to happen in the top 10, especially in this draft. You know, I think I wrote the Falcons in 11 mock drafts, 7 different players were taken in that spot at number 8. So that is what kind of draft this is going to be. I think it's going to be more intriguing one way or another because either the players aren't good enough or maybe they are. We'll just have to see. But the trade down candidates aren't great because unless you're trading up for a quarterback at the very top, you don't want to trade up in this draft. On that note, we're going to get out of here. Nick and I will be back tomorrow on Mile High Huddle. We'll be back on these channels Monday at 9 a.m. for the Falcons podcast. And we're here every Wednesday morning on Coast to Coast Football at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Appreciate you joining us. Want to give a special shout out to our Super Chat contributors, Achy Dragon, Mark Schrader, John Clay Eventing. Thank you very much. Like I said, it helps keep the lights on. It helps keep my forehead nice and shiny with those lights. So on that note, I want to say thank everybody for being here. Thanks for coming and hitting those like buttons. I see all of y'all. And we will see you Monday morning. Have a good weekend, everybody.